Hello and welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Kato. Friday saw the coalition of the willing convene in London, hosted by British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. No doubt European leaders have been hard at work this week trying to deliver urgent support to Ukraine. To talk about this week's efforts, I'm joined by Dr. Eoin Micheál McNamara, researcher at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Hello and thank you very much for being with us.
Great to be here again.
So let's start. Can we say that there has been any substantial progress that has been made by the Europeans in regards to the Ukraine-Russia peace process? Or, if we are to be blunt and honest, are we more or less in the same spot?
Well, I think with the Europeans, all progress is incremental at this stage. We have had discussions around further sanctions. We have had discussions around further military aid packages. But I think the most important thing about this coalition of the willing is to signal to Ukraine and Ukrainians that it is not alone, that there will be significant support for Ukraine into the future. That Russia will not be able to bully Ukraine, and there will be support to rebuild Ukraine once a fair and just peace for Ukraine is agreed. So I think these are positive signals being sent.
So we're talking about signals and really quite positive statements. But in terms of what the EU Council leaders achieved this time, especially at a time of heightened tensions, because we mustn't forget about Slovakia and Hungary. What happened at the EU Council this time round?
Well, Slovakia and Hungary are always thorns in the side of EU policy on Ukraine, where beyond those two countries there is a great deal of consensus. And I think when we look back at the last 6 months, not just the last EU summit, we can see that the EU has been very good at managing the crisis in transatlantic relations. We have had a shortage of weapons coming from the United States. There was doubts on whether Donald Trump would turn off the tap of military supplies completely. But of course, the US or the European Union stood in. The European Union does not have the same military clout as the United States, but it does have financial clout, and it was able to strike a deal with the Trump administration that U.S. weapons supplies for Ukraine would continue, but this would be financed by European money. So this has kept Ukraine very much on the battlefield these last few months, and has been an effective way of managing the crisis in transatlantic relations.
But would you say that aside from the meetings, because there have been a lot of them, and there are a lot of positive statements, like you said, that suggest that Ukraine isn't alone and it won't be bullied by Russia. But would you say that there is a sense of fatigue overall in terms of the support that is being provided for Ukraine?
There is no doubt a considerable amount of fatigue there, but these things go in ebbs and in flows, I would argue, and I think that's why initiatives like the coalition of the willing, put together by Prime Minister Keir Starmer, are very important, because they remind us again of the importance of solving issues in Ukraine for European security. This is not just a problem for Ukraine, but if Russia gains momentum from the war in Ukraine, if it gets a peace on Moscow's terms, then this will be a much larger problem, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe. So Europe needs to stay the course, and I think initiatives like the Coalition of the Willing are very good at keeping these issues at the top of the agenda.
Well, like you say, of course, in the broadest sense, the meeting that ended the week of the Coalition of the Willing is in some ways, symbolically and both practically, a sense that we're moving forward with the peace process for Ukraine. But there is criticism. Even yesterday, the analysis suggested that nothing really substantial came out of it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, but it was good. It was good that they met. And I mean, things at the moment with Ukraine, the wider transatlantic diplomacy, the US-Russia diplomacy, the European diplomacy continues to progress at a lightning pace. So just because a meeting looks failed or nothing came out of it, I wasn't privy to what was discussed at the meeting, but some building blocks for future initiatives could well have been discussed. And essentially, I would say we live to fight another day, and that other day will probably come soon. And there is likely to be some progress there. But looking for breakthroughs, I think, is a fool's errand at this point in time. I would say when we look at the coalition of the willing, in particular, progress is likely to be incremental, and that is simply a signifier of Europe's power. In the transatlantic partnership, Europe does not have the military power, the political power to move Earth. We need our cooperation with the United States to do that, and progress can be slow, unfortunately.
Moving back to what happened in Brussels this week, we know that EU leaders failed in terms of agreeing on a reparations loan. So frozen Russian assets are still not being utilised. How would you assess the Belgian Prime Minister's scepticism and the standstill on the matter? And more importantly, do you actually think that Ursula von der Leyen will succeed in pushing the reparations loan through before the end of the year?
This is always the way within the European Union. There's always technical details. There's always worries about precedents that these things might set. I think.
But this is an issue that has been on the table for such a long time, and it seemed like we were making progress and that we were so close. What happened this time?
There's always deadlocks, there's always concerns, there's always worries. There is, unfortunately, within the European Union, a culture of kicking the can down the road to the next meeting before we get a breakthrough. So, unfortunately, at this time, and time is not probably on our side, this is always the European Union's weakness. It always reaches out for more time when time might not be on our side.
There are lawyers that are involved. It's not just the leaders that are working on this.
Lawyers are always very, very important. But if a breakthrough of a decision has to be made, we need political consensus. And that is always slow to achieve within the European Union. That is simply
So can you tell our viewers?
Can you
tell our viewers what the Belgian Prime Minister's concerns are this time round?
Well, I think he's concerned, perhaps, about the precedent this would set legally, and in that regard, more discussion needs to take place.
So, what are the Belgian Prime Minister's concerns this time round? Because obviously there have been many legal concerns all the way until this point round, but this reparations loan is the newest format of being able to utilise the frozen Russian assets. So what is the problem now?
Well, I think at this point in time, things are really getting serious. On this, there's a lot of pressure from many other European Union member states, and these issues on essentially taking this money and redistributing it and using the European Union's power in that regard. Nothing like this has been done before. And I think the Belgian Prime Minister is worried that we will open potentially a Pandora's box here. So more clarification is likely necessary in this regard.
So now moving on to this coming week, we know that there are some sort of developments with the Russian president's special envoy now visiting Washington. What do you expect to emerge out of that meeting now?
Well, What we're seeing right now in U.S.-Russia relations is the and it's kind of a triangular relationship. It's not just U.S.-Russia, Ukraine involved as well. I mean, last week we saw Donald Trump. Rumors from behind the scenes trying to pressure Zelensky to give in to some sort of land swap. Then we saw, so he was suddenly, Trump was back on the side of Putin again. Then we saw Trump get frustrated with Putin for the strikes he initiated on Ukraine and his foot dragging on a potential peace for Ukraine, and suddenly Trump sanctions two main Russian oil companies. So Trump is very, very unpredictable. So I think there will be more discussions. Trump will probably try to put more pressure on this envoy, and we could see things collapse and nothing happen, or potentially we could see this as a route to another US-Russia summit between Trump and Putin. But of course, I mean, lots was promised, both worryingly so and maybe positively so, out of the Alaska summit. That was only in August, and we're at deadlock again. So there's going to be lots of twists and turns on this road as these matters progress.
But do you think the combination of this 19th sanctions package coming out of the EU in combination with the sanctions coming out of the US, do you think that that put together with this visit from the Russian envoy, do you think that this might actually bring Putin to the negotiating table?
It certainly ratchets up the pressure in Putin. It is a significant step. However, I mean, when we look at what Putin himself has said, Putin has referred to this package as serious, which is rare in itself for the Russians. Normally, they pretend that they don't feel the pain and they disparage these sanctions initiatives. But Putin has described this as serious. But of course, with sanctions, it takes some time for these sanctions to bite. So looking into this, I wouldn't be expecting too much progress too soon.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Eoin Micheál McNamara, researcher at the Finnish Institute of International Relations. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
And that wraps up this edition of World Talks. Thank you for joining us, and make sure that you stay with us for more exclusive interviews and updates. Goodbye.